Hello everyone, Sidewin here. Today we are going to be talking about the Maestro Bard, the character who is obsessed with beauty and turns it into magical music. So to start, breaking this class down, the key attribute is of course charisma for all of the various Bard subclasses. This means that generally Bards are known for their ability to talk to people and to perform, because performance is based on charisma. The hit dice for the Bard is a d8. So this isn't exactly your most durable class, but it's also not your most fragile. It is a spontaneous spellcaster, meaning you have a list of known spells, and you can cast any of those spells in any of your available spell slots, but you cannot swap them out day to day. You can only swap them up upon level up or using retrain. The Bard is a full spellcaster, meaning that it has full focus spells and casting available, like the maximum available in the game. And it is the main class for the occult spell list, although the spell list is also used by certain witch subclasses and a few other specific groups. Now, the most unique thing about the Bard is its unique ability of composition spells. These are focus spells, some of which are cantrips, meaning you can use them an infinite number of times. But all of them are focused on helping your allies or determining knowledge or something like that. In the case of the Maestro, it's mostly helping your allies. So the main summary I can give for the Maestro Bard, and the Bard in general, is it's a skill monkey with some minor survivability. Like, this isn't the person you usually want on the front lines, but it's also not somebody who needs to hide way in the back and hope that none of the monsters come to them, like many wizards. The Bard has expert perception, allowing them to notice things in their environment easily, which is very useful in social encounters so that you can see through an enemy's deception. It has high will save, and then moderate fortitude and reflex saves. This means that the Bard is not easily affected by mental effects, but is more vulnerable to physical ones. Then, the skill monkey part, the Bard is automatically trained in occultism, fitting considering it's an occult spellcaster. Performance, also fitting due to their casting method is literally singing, dancing, or playing an instrument. The instrument is the default. And then they also get 4+ intelligence additional skills. This means that generally you don't have to invest in intelligence to get a bunch of skills as a Bard, but you still might want to get a few more. It just depends on what you're doing. Like, those 4 skills could all be put into the different charisma skills, and you could have proficiency in every single one, for instance. Then the Bard is trained in simple and martial weapons, just like all the martial classes and a couple of spellcasters. But this does not mean that it should be a martial class. It's not. It is not a stab people and kill them class. But in a pinch, a Bard can always stab someone. Then the class is trained in up to light armor. So you can wear no armor or wear light armor. Either way, you're fine. You cannot use medium or heavy armor, however, so that does decrease survivability a little. Alright, so on the spellcasting front, this is the main thing the Bard has. At every single level, the main thing they have is their spellcasting. And I divide spellcasting into 3 different groups. First is the slot group. This is the number of leveled spells you can cast each day. So it's not a set one in each slot like it is for prepared casters, but you still have a limited number. The second grouping is known spells. These are all the spells you can possibly cast in those slots, plus your known cantrips. The final group is focus spells, and I'll talk more about those later. So to start, with the slot part, you start with 2 level 1 spell slots. So this means you can cast 2 spells a day out of those slots. And what spells can you cast from those? So your known spells are 5 cantrips, which you do not get more at higher levels, but you do have the ability to swap them out at every level up. Then you have 3 first level spells. One of those is set by the class. That is Soothe. It's given by the Maestro Bard subclass. It's a spell that basically does a bit of healing. Then you get to pick 2 spells off the occult spell list. I'll talk a bit more about these spells later. Then the final thing the Bard gets at level 1 on the spellcasting front is a focus spell. They start with 1 focus point, and the class automatically gives 1 cantrip to every single subclass called Courageous Anthem. Then you also gain 1 focus spell from your subclass. In the case of the Maestro Bard, this is Lingering Composition. This is coming up a little later in the video. Alright, so I'm going to highlight a couple of spells here that are very important to know, or at least they're Bard focused. So the first one is Musical Accompaniment. It is a 2-action to cast cantrip, which is mostly useful to bards. So the way it works is it gives you a +1 status bonus to all performance checks. Some bard class abilities are based on performance checks, so having this ability at a high level is pretty good. Basically, it makes you more likely to succeed. Optionally, depending on your GM's discretion, the spell can also give +1 to charisma checks, such as deception, diplomacy, or intimidation. However, whenever you're using musical accompaniment, you have -4 to self, because the way the spell works is basically you get your own soundtrack following you around the world. For roleplay reasons, this is also very fitting for the bard. The second spell I wanted to mention is Summon Instrument. If your bard, like most bards, is using an instrument, you generally don't want to be without it, because the instrument is necessary to use your spells. And to be honest, a lot of musicians do not also sing very well, so it's probably best to usually have an instrument. But the one thing that's limited about it is it can only summon handheld instruments, so you can't just summon up a piano. And it can, suit certain roleplay situations. However, the definition of handheld is something I'm probably going to end up debating on and off a bit, because there's different ways you could define it, and that's probably dependent on your GM. Then the final cantrip is that Courageous Anthem that all bards get. It costs 1 action to use, and lasts 1 round by default. So generally, if you have an extra action each round, you want to cast this, because it gives +1 to attack, damage, and fear effects to all your nearby allies. Basically the same effect as the Bless spell, but infinite use. So, why not, really? If you have another reason to be using other actions and not this spell, do it. But, in general, if you can't figure out what your third action should be, Courageous Anthem is usually a good one, although you frequently want to make it your first action so that you could benefit. Then a couple of first level spells to mention. The first one, Soothe. This is what's given by the Maestro Bard subclass. It takes 2 actions to cast, and it gives 1d10 plus 4 hit points, and +2 status bonus versus mental effects to 1 chosen ally. This is a generally it's the healing spell on the occult list. It's the heal of the occult list. You do not have access to heal on the occult list, so Soothe gives you that. But in general, it's just a nice one to have, and you can just always cast it. It doesn't take one of your known spells. Now, one thing I'll mention here is there's one spell you do not want to take, and that is Bless. There's probably some niche case in which you would take it, but in reality, Courageous Anthem does pretty much the same thing, and it doesn't cost a spell slot. So why would you take the one that costs a spell slot? Now I'm going to talk here at the end of the video about focus spells. So essentially the way focus spells work is you have a pool at the start of combat. For the Maestro Bard and most spellcasters, it is a pool of 1 point at first level. At higher levels, it goes up to a maximum of 3 points. And you can gain them from multiple classes, but you only have 1 focus pool, and you only have the max of the maximum from the max class. It's a little complicated, and we don't need to go into that here. So the way it works is you can spend your focus point to cast spells in combat. So, for instance, you could use it to cast Lingering Composition, the Maestro Bard subclass-specific spell. And you just cast it, and you lose that focus point like you would lose a hero point. But the unique thing about foci points is that you can, out of combat, refresh them with a 10-minute refocus action, only up to the maximum you can have. So for the first level Maestro Bard, this is out of combat, you can refresh back up to 1 focus point, and have it every single combat. Basically, this is a renewable resource that's sort of an encounter ability. Now, for the absolute end here, I'm going to talk about Lingering Composition. This is the unique focus spell for the Maestro Bard subclass. The way it works is you cast it, spend your focus point, though you might get it back if you fail, then you roll a performance check. Again, another reason musical accompaniment can be very useful, because it gives you a +1 bonus, and a +1 bonus is a +1 bonus, so you don't generally want to sacrifice it. Then, if you fail, you get the focus point back. But you cast it after casting another spell. It is a free action to use Lingering Composition. So, if you succeed, it makes it so that the spell lasts 3 rounds, rather than presumably 1. So, for instance, you can make it so that the Courageous Anthem lasts 3 rounds. Critical successes give 4 rounds. Now, to note, the performance check DC is based on the level of the highest level target of the spell. So, for instance, if you're level 1, most likely the highest level target you could be going for is like level 3 or 4. So, in that case, you'd be rolling versus that DC. Note that only applies for debuffs, and that's only against a boss. Generally, it's more useful to cast it on your allies, because they will be the same level as you, meaning that you have a decent chance of succeeding on the DC. If you have any additional questions or comments on this Bard subclass, feel free to ask in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful.